All right, welcome back. So when we left off, we had created our interlocking buttons for the navigation system, but as I said, those buttons and that coding was done terribly. We are going to do them better. Why did I say they were done terribly? Well, it took us a really long time to do it, right? We had to grab every single block and lock them together, and if you look at it, it feels like we're just forcing things. It's a very manual way to do it. We're saying turn that off and turn that off and then turn this on and then turn that on. Every single time we do the same thing 3 times in a row with the event handler, it just feels like we're doing too much work, and we are doing too much work. If there's a golden rule that I can impart on you throughout this entire training, it's that if you are going to do something twice, make it a function.
That's what my mom always said.
That's not what your mom always says.
No.
I know that for a fact.
What?
That sounded worse than it was. If you do something twice, like Patrick's mom, make it a function. What? I'm keeping that. So, make it a function. We are going through this event handler and we are doing the same thing over and over again. We're turning off all the layers. We're resetting all the buttons over and over and over and over again. Why not remove that from the event handlers and turn that into just a single replicatable piece of script? That's what a function is. So we're going to use functions to make this a little bit better. So first of all, let's take a look. What are we doing in this section? We are going to revise our navigation script, rewrite the navigation event handlers to be more efficient and scalable. We're going to use functions. We're going to use variables. We're going to use if-else statements. And then in order to do this, we're going to validate the conditions of our buttons by comparing states of controls in order to make this a little bit easier. So some new concepts for this video. First of all, variables. We will be using variables. If you've ever taken algebra, you know what a variable is. X equals, Y equals, right? It's just a thing that can be anything else you determine that thing to be. It has a variable state. A function is kind of like a variable in that it can be recalled and it does a bunch of things. And it doesn't matter what the name of the function is, but anything can reference that function, the same way that anything could reference a variable, and it'll do all of the things in that function's event handler. We're also going to be using the if-else block. That's our flow control we mentioned earlier. If condition 1 is true, then we do a thing. If condition 2 is true, then we do something else. And then a logic operator where we take a look at 2 different things and see if they are equitable, if they have the same state or value or string, something like that. Let's take a look back at our design. This was what we just built. This is what we now want to destroy. So we're going to scroll on up to the top, and I'm going to go to the variables and functions branch. And let's start off by looking at our functions. We have the first block called define function do something. Or do something. That's what your mom's always said, Patrick. Do something. Come on.
You're a mean, mean man.
So grab that, and we're going to basically create a function, and we can name it whatever we want. Do something is just the default name. Let's name this reset all layers and buttons, because that's the thing that we want to occur that's happening in every single one of these event handlers. And then let's move all of the instances of that out of the event handlers and throw it into the function. So all of this changing of the layers, I'm going to take it out, break these apart. I'm going to snap all these together, and I'm going to move them up into my base function. So when we reset all the layers, I'm going to hide every layer, hide 100, hide 200, hide 300, and show the base one. And that way, in our actual event handler, all we really need to do, let me snap these all back to each other. Sorry, let's get these back in place. All that we need to do now, we don't need this comment, we don't need that comment. All we need to do is turn on the layer that we do care about. So I'm going to duplicate our turn on layer, and we're going to show 100. And I'm going to do the same thing for the buttons. Rather than do it for all 3 of them, I'm going to take them and move them into our big giant function. I'm going to have 3 things happen. Right? I'm going to set nav1 to be false. I'll set nav2 to be false. and nav3 to be false. We're basically putting everything in a safe state where all the layers are off and all the buttons are off. And then here in the event handler, all that we do is turn number 1 on, right? And the way we make sure our function runs first is we go back to our functions. Now that we've created a function, you'll see it listed down here at the bottom as a thing that you can do. And it's got those little teeth in the top and the bottom, which means it likes to stack vertically with other things. We'll grab our function out, and we'll run this at the top of our event handler. So the first thing that happens anytime someone presses this button is it hits this line that says reset all layers and buttons. And then the code goes and finds that function. And it scrolls up here and says, that's what you want me to do. So it's going to then run down every single block that's in this event handler. When it gets done with its list of things, then it returns back to where it was and continues down from here. So after everything's been reset, then we turn on layer 1, we turn on button 1, we debug the print, Bob's your uncle, we're done, right? That's the goal. So I'm going to even remove this comment now just to make this look nice and clean. Again, debugs are important and comments are important as well. We want to make sure that we speak to the next person and tell them what we're doing. But in this case, this is pretty obvious. It's running this function, it's turning off these layers. That's what we want to do to replace our other 2 giant event handlers as well. And in fact, I'm just going to delete them. I know we spent a lot of time building them, but I'm going to delete them because at this point, duplicating is going to be easier. So now I'm going to duplicate nav2. We say that when nav2 changes, yes, we reset everything, but we show layer 200, and we turn on button 2. Do the same thing for nav3. When nav3 changes, we turn on layer 300, and we turn on button 3. And then we save. So this script is much more, friendly, coding friendly, because we're taking all of the excess stuff that we're doing, and we're only doing that once. And then the individual event handlers only do the actions that are specific to them. Now, the end result is exactly the same. If I go to class UCI, I go to my different tabs, the exact same functionality. There's nothing that's changed here. The end user doesn't know that you did it with long, sloppy event handlers versus a function and individual on-offs, but the coding side of it is cleaner. It's just cleaner. And you'll find that it's going to be easier to adapt later because now that we've put everything into our function, if we needed to adapt and add things that happen every single time you press the navigation buttons, you can do it here in the function rather than adding it in event handler 1 and an event handler 2 and an event handler 3. Only one place to adapt your code. That means that you're not going to get into a circumstance where you forget to add it in different places when you're adapting your script later on, because you don't have to. It's all consolidated into one source of truth. That's what the function is. In fact, with that in mind, it may be a good idea for us to actually go even further with this. Because right now, yeah, we got most of the stuff in one function, but we're still doing some stuff down here and some stuff down here and some stuff down here. We may find, and this is always something you want to think about when you're writing your code, you may find that there might be something later on that could also cause this to occur. Right now, when these buttons change, we change what the user is seeing on the UCI. What if there's something else in the system that might want to do that too? That's going to be true in our design because we're going to have something later on where when you plug in the USB cable for your laptop, we want the UCI to automatically go to the cameras tab because we know that that's probably what you're looking for. Well, that's a navigation tab on the UCI that's not being triggered by a button press on the screen. So if we think forward to that, that means we'd have to write another event handler for that action that's going to end up doing the exact same thing as these buttons, which means now there's 2 different places where the same activity is occurring. And what should you do if you're going to do something twice?
Call mom and tell her not to.
That's why Patrick's here. You're going to make it a function, right? So that's the goal. We want to put everything into the function. Put everything into the function that we can. That way, later on, when the USB cable gets connected, we run that function. That's all we got to do. We got to run that function. We don't need to do the things inside these event handlers. So let's think about that. What we want to do is we want to, yes, run everything inside this function already, reset all the layers and the buttons, and then we want to validate, hey, if button 1 was pressed, let's do these things. If button 2 was pressed, let's do these things. If button 3 was pressed, let's do those things. I'm using the word if. That means we need our if-else block. So we'll go to our flow control, grab that top one, the if, it says if do, snap that into the bottom of our functions event handler. Now this one has some weird looking teeth. It's kind of like a crocodile that's had its entire snout cut off. But it's still got a mouth. That mouth is still the list of things in a normal event handler. But it will only do those things under a certain condition. If whatever you plug in here equals the word true. That's what it's looking for. If this condition is true, then we go down the line. And there's lots of things you could plug in there that would equal the word true. Let's worry about that part just a little bit later on. First, let's start building out our if-else statements. Right now, we only have one possible condition. If condition 1, then we do something. But we need 3 possible scenarios here, 3 different things that could cause them to occur. We could edit our if-else block by hitting this cog icon. And here we have like a little miniature version of the block controller contained within a block, where we've got a list of categories of things that we can add to the block. And then this white space represents the block itself. So I've got an if, that's part of my block. I'm going to add an else if. Grab the else if block and snap it under the if block. And what this is doing is it's reconfiguring our block here in the main editor window. Now you can see we have 2 conditions. If number 1, else if number 2. We actually need 3 of these. If button 1 is one possibility, if that's not true, else, then we're going to look at another possibility, if something else is true. Else, something else will happen. I could add an else at the end of it all, which means that if none of the first conditions have been met, then we will do this thing. But in our case, we don't need that because we're validating 3 possible things, and if none of them are true, then we don't really care because it didn't happen in the first place. Okay, close this little mini editor window by clicking on the cog icon. And we're going to go and grab all of the things that are specific to our individual button event handlers and move them into our if-else block. So grab all of this chunk. Just rip it right out of your nav1 room change event handler and drop it in right here. That way, if the first button is pressed, we'll do these things. If the second button is pressed, we'll do these things. If the third button is pressed, we'll do these things. We're leaving the function in our event handlers for the buttons, right? We still need that because when the button is pressed, we need to run this function. We're not moving that function within the function. That would create an infinite loop that would stop the system. So we don't want that. But now we've got 3 possible lists of commands based on a criteria. Let's talk about that criteria.